Happy Friday night and Valentine's Day Eve for all you lusting lovers out there. We have a great show for you tonight. We got some ball knowers here with us today to talk about all the players that you need to know when you're thinking about the NFL Combine. Over a week away, there's so many gems out there. They're saying it's a bad class, but is it really? Find out right now live on From the Forum. Yo. What a crew do we have here tonight? Tyler could not make it because he's probably making way too many other things on this fine Friday evening. But let's just go around the horn real quick, make sure everybody knows who we're talking to. We already got people jumping in the chat. Dan, we'll kick it off with you and go around the horn. Let people know where they can find you. You should be a familiar face, but then we'll keep going on through just to make sure that everybody knows who is in the house tonight.
Yeah, super excited to be here again. Dan Mater, Operation Domination at Dan Mater FF on your social media. We are cranking out the content every single week, baby. I'm loving the off season right now.
All right, better looking Joe. What do you got for me?
Yeah, you guys heard me last week. Joe Bartle, host of two different Sirius XM shows, JB Fantasy Sports on Twitter, on X. This is my favorite time of the year. I think one of my three holidays that I celebrate every year is the NFL draft. So let's gear up to it. And I'm excited from a dynasty perspective to have some pretty good conversations here with the guys here.
All right, bring it up, Chris.
You know who it is. It's Chris Luff at Chris the Card Man right here on FSAN on the Devi Dojo. We're working hard right now. Me and my partner in crime, Dustin, are heading up the charge on our FSAN rookie guide. So I have been deep in the weeds on prospects and writing up all these different players so that you guys can enjoy them on our rookie guide here coming out very, very soon. Probably like 3 weeks we'll release it. And then we'll do an update again after the draft. So it'll be great.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for being here on this fine Friday evening. We've already got some folks in the chat as well. We got Tryhard 0012. We ready for y'all. Love that. We got the hostess with the mostest, even when he's on bye week, still showing up for the squad. We got Tyler in the chat. Hope you're feeling better, my guy. Then we got BHS Cardinal all the time in the house. Ultimate ball knower. What's up, crew? Happy Friday to you, my friends. So, boys, let's get into it. Let's get this Friday night popping. Like you said, we've got the combine starting February 22nd. For a lot of you people that are into the dynasty scene, this is the time of year where you're really doing a lot of work, right? The regular season happens. You may make a move here or two. There may be one guy that pops off on waivers, but for the most part, the off season is really when we're living big from a dynasty perspective. And this is where there's the most speculative opportunity. We're already seeing some too early quarterback rankings, running back rankings. Who are you taking in the first round? But we know that once we get those RAS scores popping, we see these different clips from the combine that are either making or breaking things for folks, that all this stuff is going to change. So the first thing that I want to ask, and Dan, I'll start with you. What do you think are like important things that fantasy players need to be thinking about when they're looking at the combine? And like, what moves would you make in this transitional period of the offseason to either acquire capital or to kind of sell off if you have an excess of picks and are looking for more firm players?
Well, for this year in particular, and I think I've talked about this before, I'm looking to try and shift myself in the 2027. Really excited about that draft from a fantasy football perspective. And outside, I would say the top 9 guys. If you don't have a first round pick in that top 9, I'm not super crazy about the value you're going to get at the end of that first round. I don't think it's much different than the second round till about the 8th pick in the second round. So if you can position yourself to start slightly moving it out, of course, it all depends on what team, what your team makeup is. But that's kind of the move that I'm looking to make in this particular year. And I think you can get that kind of value, especially this early on in the process when everyone's really genuinely just starting to do their homework for the most part.
Sure. So what about you, Chris? Everybody always says that the best draft class is always the next draft class. So where do you see that we might be able to find some value in 2026, or are you also full punt into 2027 mode?
I'm definitely more punt than Dan. I think I'm thinking more like top 7. If you don't have a top 7 pick, you're wanting to kick these picks off. And I don't necessarily. I mean, obviously, 2027 is great. It's a class we've been, targeting for a while in the Devy landscape. It's a class that's going to be good, but you see it every year now. The college football landscape is so shooken up because of this new NIL stuff. I mean, we literally have Trinidad Chambliss trying to stay in college instead of going to the NFL in a weak quarterback draft class. We have players that want to be in college. So it's weird because you can't really predict that players are going to come out when you think they are. So 27 picks are certainly valuable, and I think that you should be trading for them, especially like Dan said, if you're in the back end of the first round. But I would just be targeting vets, man. If there's guys that you feel like are undervalued or players that have produced and are coming into a season where they might be a little bit undervalued, just trade your picks for them, because it seems like the consensus is that this draft class is not great and people's values are a little bit down, which means you might be able to snag a couple of veterans here and there instead of, especially as we get ramped up towards draft season when everybody's draft crazy and they just want those picks, man.
Yeah, for sure. I saw some heads nodding there. I did want to give a couple shout outs here from the chat. IBT Media, excellent crew. Hit a like for the people over at FSAN. Yeah, for sure. Give us that like, subscribe, notifications on so you can see our pretty beautiful faces at all times. Then we had a question in the chat. Did they okay the 6 years? So initially they said no. They found a new judge in the area that kind of okayed it. We'll see how the NCAA appeals. I don't know if it was a true story, but I did hear a rumor that Chambliss was signing some autographs for the judge before the hearing. So we'll see what the truth was before that. But, you got to give it to the SEC. They're always pushing the limits of how you can cheat, even when it's now legal. So good on them for trying to maintain their top spot in the NCAA football world. So you talked a little bit about it, Joe. I know that you've kind of said that this is your favorite time of the year. I'm going to throw this one to you. Do you think that it's hurting the draft stock for Chambliss to go back to school? He's entering elite territory with the likes of like the Brandon Whedons of the world, hitting that 6th, 7th year mark. So what does that look like for you if he does return back to school? Does that hurt him going forward when we're looking at potentially a stacked class?
Yeah, 100%. So I'll default to Dan and Chris. I think from a prospect perspective, I think this point of the year for me is watching a bit more of the college tape. I'll do the YouTube highlights and the like. Like, I think both these guys are probably more adept at answering from a prospect perspective. Are these guys good or not? I think there's a lot more information we get from the combine, certainly the pro days as well, too. And we can kind of make our own assessments. To me, I want all of the data in front of me, and then I'm comfortable making my stands or pitches on players or whatever else like that. But I think just as a competitor, I went and played very, very rec league soccer about an hour and a half ago. So if I look a little bit sweaty, that's because we lost 8-2, and I was pissed in the second half that we were getting our butt spanked, as we do every single Friday. You cannot tell me that I'm going to be drafting Chambliss in maybe even the second round if he's actively choosing to go back to college for his 6th collegiate season, as opposed to trying to be a productive and major I was going to say fantasy player, but major NFL quarterback. Like, I'm not going to tell somebody at that level of competition compared to my rec league soccer that you're not a competitor any more than me. But like, that is such a red flag just as a competitor, like, from what I want from my quarterback, especially the most important position, that it feels like he's actively chasing the money. I don't think he's all that good anyway. I think we can point to a lot of the advanced metrics on, like, when you're an older prospect, what are you supposed to be doing? The mobility part of things, does that translate to the NFL level? I think there are some people that know he's a name, so therefore I'll throw him into the top 10 or whatever it is. I've seen a few places do that. I never believed he was anything more than, let's just say, a day 2 quarterback, maybe later day 2. But I think this is a very, very eye-opening choice for a quarterback that theoretically could be pushing for number 2, number 3 in this class. I don't think he was there anyway, but this is a major opposite of the competitor kind of thing that I would want my quarterback to do.
I think Chambliss just knows that he's not an NFL quarterback. Therefore, he's trying to milk the money he can get.
Yes.
While he can get it. I think that's so. Like, in a way, I want to applaud him. Like, you know what you are, buddy. Go ahead, go get that 6th year in college. We know you're not really an NFL quarterback. And as far as like hurting his draft stock goes, yes, on one hand, you can make the argument there's less quarterback competition in this class than there will be next year. But at the same time, I don't think it would have mattered either way. He would have been a day 3 pick.
Yeah, and if you look at the contracts of, say, like a Dylan Gabriel or a Shador Sanders, players that both got starting time this year in the league, he's going to make more money than them next year being in the
Oh, yeah.
NCAA with how things are. So, yeah, even if he's going to be second, third round guy, which I don't think that he would have been, the payday is just not going to
CBS had him top 10. I'll just say there's been a few places that have put him as a top 10 draft pick. I'm sure
Does
Mel
that
Kiper's,
happen
but
every year though? I mean, even just looking back at like the Kenny Pickett draft, it was like Kenny Pickett's going to go 4th overall.
well, that was Malik Willis,
is going to
right?
go 10th overall, and then it was like they picked one, and then Willis falls. I feel like the quarterback.
That's just the hot take media market.
Yeah.
You know, they want to get clicks. They're going to say stupid stuff. There's no, I mean, this guy didn't even start the entire season. You know, we have people that are concerned about Ty Simpson because he hasn't had more than 15 collegiate starts.
But Chris, did you watch him in the playoffs? He was so good. I have so many stupid friends that I have to have this conversation with. This is a great 4-pack of people to talk about this with because I completely agree. And I thought I was going to be like on this lone island, like, come on, guys. But no, I absolutely. We should not be overrated. And this is just overall sports media we could get into, but we're overrating 4, 3, 2 collegiate playoff games. Like, come on, like that should not be a big factor in determining your draft stock whatsoever.
Well, and I think I had this conversation before. I might have even been on the show. I don't know. But it's okay to be a good college quarterback. And it's okay to recognize the difference between being a good college quarterback and not being an NFL prospect. And that perspective needs to come into play at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the things that y'all said that was interesting, Chris, you kind of pointed this out, is that rookie rankings right now are very fragile, and we're grasping at straws. We have a bit of recency bias based on the playoffs, and that's why Will Howard is going to be the greatest quarterback, not only in Steelers history, but in NFL history. So we got that going for us, though. But what do you think swings those narratives the most? Like, what are you looking at when you're saying, all right, like, this could be a big thing? I feel like Malachi Fields is all over draft boards right now, and he doesn't necessarily have the stats to back it up. So what can a player like that do to continue to boost their draft stock, not only from an NFL perspective, but when you're thinking about you maybe have a back end of the first round pick, what are those things that you're looking for that's like, all right, I'm going to lock in on this guy?
I think that we tend to lock in, you know, all of us as fantasy players, especially in the modern era, to analytics, and we use that to drive a lot of our analysis, especially if you have a Twitter account, man. It's everywhere. You know, you're going to see a million stats, and I'm guilty of that too. I think analytics drive a lot, and that's why I've faded players in the past. I whiffed pretty hard on Brian Thomas Jr. because I didn't like his yards per route run. You know, you're going to get burned when you look at only analytics and not just the tape. So I think whenever you're thinking in the mind of an NFL GM, I think that they are a little bit more closer to us than they have been in the past as far as analytics. They're definitely, you know, trying to use every avenue in order to evaluate these players. But really it comes down to what happens on tape. And this, for me specifically, is a conversation with KC Concepcion, because I don't necessarily love his analytics. I don't necessarily love his game, but I have a feeling that there's going to be an NFL GM that loves his game enough to sneak him into the first round or the early second round. So, you know, somebody put in our chat outside of the big five. You know, for me, there's a big three. There's not really a big five, but I'm assuming that's Boston and Concepcion are the next two. I think that there's a good reason that KC Concepcion is getting all this hype. It's because the tape looks pretty good on certain plays, and there's going to be an NFL GM that falls in love with him and drafts him a little bit highly. I do love this wide receiver class, though. I think it's pretty deep. You know, we talk about this class not being great, but that's really not necessarily a wide receiver thing. That's every other position thing.
Cool. All right. So where do y'all fit in, Dan, Joe? I know, Joe, you said you haven't really dove in too much. So, Dan, I'll start with you. Where do you feel like maybe outside of the players that are already being talked about, who is somebody that you're looking at the wide receiver position? I've heard quite a bit that seems to be where the greatest depth is in this class. So where can we target players like that? Who are you looking at?
Yeah, so, and this kind of piggybacks off the Big Five idea. It's really a three-way tie for me as far as who's going to be that sixth wide receiver. I love Skylar Bell and his productivity coming out of UConn. I love Zachary Branch, what he could be as a slot receiver in the NFL. I think he'd be really good in a certain scheme. But then I'm looking at the trends of the NFL lately. and it's moving more towards bigger personnel, more tight ends on the field, more bigger wide receivers on the field. So the slot receiver is kind of slowly dying in a sense, and we're getting back. I almost feel like we're going back to 2005. Running backs are hot, ex perimeter wide receivers are hot. So Malachi Fields, I know you mentioned him a little bit earlier. He's that one guy when you ask about, okay, how big of a factor is the combine in a guy's draft prospects? He's that type of guy where if he goes out there and lights it up in the combine, we might see his stock rise more than anybody because he has all the tools that you want to have. And I think you can excuse some of the things you see on tape due to the fact that we know they did not have a great quarterback and a great offensive system in place there in Notre Dame. So a lot of that can excuse away if he winds up going out there and having a big combine performance. I think he go a lot higher than a Michael Wilson, who he constantly gets comped to by a lot of people out there. So I'd put him kind of in that realm with the way the trend of the NFL is leaning as of late.
Cool. So a name, or I guess a team that we're not hearing a lot about outside of their quarterback is the Indiana Hoosiers. I'm curious what y'all think about Surratt and Omar Cooper Jr. because I felt like when I watched them, and I don't really watch college football to be like, oh man, like what am I doing in drafts? I'm like, I want to have a beer and I want to watch football, and like they seem like they do good things when the TV is on, which I can't say is a lot of time for me for college, but they seemed. I'm surprised to see like PFF has Omar Cooper at 14 right now. That feels criminally low.
Yeah, I'll jump in here because I think Chris and Dan can actually give more of the like actual scouting context to this. To me, we talk about trends in the NFL. You mentioned the bigger personnel. I'd agree with that as well too. That's gonna happen. One consistent trend has always been NFL teams targeting players that have been in good systems and in coaches that they trust. I think the Nick Saban, Alabama tied, right? I mean, we see Georgia as well too. My Packers draft 15 of those guys every single year. They never do well for the Packers, but that's always a target point for what the NFL teams want to do. I think Indiana is going to be that same spot. And even if you have some of the older prospects in the case of Surratt, I think in particular, but Cooper as well too, you as an NFL team could say, I can get this guy a little bit later in the draft. Although I kind of wonder if Surratt might be one of those late first round guys outside of that big five tier, but maybe in that group that jumps off from a combine perspective athletically. I don't know, but I think there's going to be the intangible part of things that NFL teams are really going to value, especially because if we like certain receivers because they can do X, Y, and Z reasons or things. Well, if this guy can do something similar in the case of Surratt in particular, in my mind, and also has the intangible factor that built up through this program and has that consistency, much of the same way as you have the Alabama guys from before. I think that matters. I think that's going to matter to a lot of the NFL coaches right now. And I think there's a lot of, let's just call them wide receiver threes on teams that could be replaced by a guy that knows it could do. It could be a boundary receiver, has some athletic profile to him. Like Surratt, in my mind, kind of fits that bill. And I think will be a trend that we see kind of teams capitalizing on what Indiana has done the past 2 years.
Chris, Dan, any thoughts on that?
I love that Surratt was on the Indiana team this year because it's making Omar Cooper Jr. fly so far under the radar right now in rookie drafts. And I love Omar Cooper Jr. If we talk about big five, he's in my big five. He's in my top 5 wide receivers coming into this rookie class. He's just so much fun to watch. He runs routes really well, but what really makes him exceptional is when he has the ball in his hands. One of the stats we love at Devi Dojo is missed tackles forced, especially when it comes to running backs. You know, it's more of a running back stat, but this guy does it all the time. He's making people miss every time he gets the ball in his hands. He's an absolute yak threat. As soon as he catches the ball, there's no chance that somebody's taking him down first tackle. So I love Omar Cooper Jr. I'm a little bit biased because I'm a Penn State guy and I watched him completely murder me with that beautiful toe tap end zone play last minute, you know. So ever since that moment, I was like, I think I'm just going to fall in love with this guy and just make the hurt a little bit less. But I do love Omar Cooper. I think he's great. And I think the fact that Elijah Surratt is such a good receiver in his own right means that he's flying a little bit more under the radar. But in my mind, I think he's got one of the highest chances to rise, you know, come draft season. I think the NFL draft might bump his stock up a little bit.
Yeah, I think I saw a lot of places he was already going in the second round, Cooper, that is, and Surratt maybe a little bit lower than that, at least consensus mocks as it is of now. So Surratt, I'm actually holding my opinion until I get to see the combine. If he comes out and shocks us all and runs a 4.5 or faster, I'm going to totally change my tune. But from an NFL prospect, I'm not actually nearly as big on Surratt. I'm not crazy about his lack of separation. While he has a lot of contested catches, from a volume standpoint, his catch rate is actually not very good, sitting at 40% there. Where Cooper, not a lot of volume, but a much better contested catch rate. And as you said, was fourth in missed tackles force at the wide receiver position this past year against college football. So I'm a bigger fan of Cooper. I think he's a more natural route runner. I think he's going to be a more natural separator. He is big enough to play the perimeter too. So he's not one of those guys who gets pigeonholed as a slot. I think he's a piece you can kind of move all a little bit around. Little flashes of JSN to me when I look at Cooper. So I'm much bigger on him. Surratt's going to have to prove some things to me athletically for me to fully get on board, especially if we're going to have the idea that he's going to be an early day 2 pick.
Sure. All right. So I got some questions related to the combine for you. Going to hit a couple more of these comments in the chat. I'm not going to throw Dane's up on there because I'm not in the business of doxing people, although people have attempted on me today. But we're going to hit up Grindberg and say, hey, where all my Billy fans at? You know, just goats out here lurking everywhere. We got Albert, who is on every stream historically of all time. If you are a fantasy football analyst and Albert isn't watching your show, it might not actually be published live because that dude is everywhere. Mad props to you. But what I wanted to ask y'all about the combine, we know that you're not Al Davis. You don't see a 40 time. You're like, all right, I'm taking this guy first overall. But what are the things that you're looking at as far as like, oh, like these are either the drills or these are the metrics that you say, okay, wow, like this would change the game for me, so that when people are watching the combine, that they can kind of see those numbers and take something with it? Or is it the total package of it all?
I'll default to you guys. This is right up your alley for sure.
Yeah, so for me, it's a lot about the prospect profile coming into the combine that dictates what it is that I'm truly looking at in the first place. So it's kind of a hard question to answer on an individual basis. Here's what I would say. The one drill that is universal to me, no matter what the position is the 3-cone drill. How quick are you? Can you make guys miss coming off the line? If you're an offensive lineman, a defensive lineman, how quick are you coming off? Like that one metric can tell me the quick burst. The quick burst is everything in the NFL. So that's the one. If you want to say there's one drill that's universal, to me, it's the 3-cone drill.
Yeah, I love that too, because like 40 time, I feel like is so overrated. And even with this class, there's, you know, the couple guys at the top that are everybody's focused on. And a lot of those guys are running in like the 4.5 range. You know what I mean? They're not the fastest guys ever, which, you know, it could be a knock on them. But when you watch them play, the short burst that they have and the ability to separate with hard cuts and, you know, head fakes and things like that. I'm talking specifically wide receivers. It's a whole different ball game. So when you're talking about ways to analyze speed outside of just your long speed, because long speed doesn't really matter in the modern NFL, right? Like you have guys that run 9s, and, you know, it's rare that you get a guy like a Jamison Williams who is one of those long speed guys that can do other things as well. A lot of times those guys are just, you know, how many times have we seen a Jalen Hyatt or someone, you know, somebody like that just completely busts, and they go out there and they run their routes. Even, I hate to say it, Xavier Worthy, maybe, you know, he might be on that path. These guys that are fast and just don't do it for us in fantasy. So you want to look at metrics that are going to be beyond just speed. And prior to me doing the dojo, which just started this year, I hadn't really watched a ton of tape. I was much more of a analytics and vibes guy. You know what I mean? And I think diving more into tape, you can see what these guys do with their subtle moves as they're, you know, running routes, or, you know, if it's a running back, if they're making defenders miss with their nuance to their game or their patience. Those things are more important than just speed.
I like it. So we've talked a lot about wide receivers and how that's kind of the area that you want to attack. Let's say that you have a good stable of wide receivers. What would you say is the next position of strength, or is there a particular player in the quarterback, running back, tight end group that might push you away from drafting one of those marquee wide receivers if you have the opportunity?
Well, I mean, the only ones would be the top guys. I mean, like Jeremiah Love and Fernando Mendoza, Sadiq, you know, for tight end, as far as pushing me away from the wide receivers. That's kind of the problem, right? I am not going to feel pushed to go away from the wide receivers, even when we get to the depth. I have some interest in Katron Allen and Jadarian Price when it comes to running backs, depending upon where they fall. I like both of them as bruisers. I like both of them. I look for their vision. It's going to very much depend on where they go, though, and what their draft capital is going to be. Because right now, both of them are talked about going early day 3. Well, that's good for a year if you're lucky, but after that, who knows? So outside of that, tight ends, there's a couple of names of interest. I like Michael Trigg. I like Eli Raridan. There's a couple of sneaky names in that sense. But when you get to the quarterback position in particular, woof. I mean, it's Mendoza and nothing as far as like actual fantasy value goes. I mean, I like Drew Alar, but we never got to see it. And he's going to be such a project with a long learning curve coming into the NFL that I kind of have him as my number 2 because I think he's the only one who has the traits to actually be a long-term starter if he can get to that point. But that's a lot of ifs that just came out of my mouth. And there's a big reason for that.
Sure. Yeah.
Chris, before you jump in, and I want to hear from Dan too, where did you guys think Tyler Shuck would be drafted at this time last year? Let's just say after the combine, because he was the only quarterback that actually did any drills, theoretically lit things up a little bit more. Like, did you think Tyler Shuck was going to be a day 2 selection?
Yes, but I had him in the third. I didn't have him in the second round, but I did have him in the third round. Yeah.
I'm eating crow with Tyler Shuck. I didn't think that he was worth it. I was way off on him. And I think now I have since changed my tune. I've been trading second rounds for him, into November. And you really can't do that at this point. I think people are starting to get hyped on him. He looks like he's going to be the starter there, at least for this year, if not longer. He's legitimately had a shot at offensive player of the year in the NFC. So
yeah, I mean the rookie class was awful. So it doesn't. I mean, like I get that. I had to like learn Tyler Shuck's name because you look at Shough. Like that's not how you say Shuck. That's really weird. What the heck? But I was listening to the Tom McShay podcast. I would say around this time, February or March, early March last year. And I'm like, why does Todd McShay keep talking about this random 26-year-old quarterback? It makes no sense. You go on every other search, you look for this guy's name. Like, what are we talking about here? Like, there's no way. Those guys just know. Like, those guys just know. And I'm saying this because I think Garrett Nussmeier is going to be that same version of that this year. I mean, like he does the Senior Bowl, right? And therefore looks fine enough there. We could point to the injuries maybe being a factor, whatever else too. The building the beast guy whose name I'm blanking on right now, and I hate that. But they were already talking about it on their podcast now for the past month. Now I think they are a little bit LSU affiliated in some capacity, but I wonder if Garrett Nussmeier is going to just be this year's Tyler Shuck, who inexplicably possibly becomes a second round pick, and we are like, oh, this guy's not very good. Maybe you could draft from the back end of the second round and almost guarantees to return value. I don't know if I really believe in him prospect that way. But to answer Joe's question, more handsome Joe's question, I should say, I like Emmett Johnson as well too. We didn't really talk about him from like a running back perspective. That one it feels like everyone's favorite sleeper, so I'm not shocking things by any means, but I do think Emmett Johnson, I think he's going to do really well at the combine as well, and he'll be that guy at the end of February talking about it, like, oh yeah, he's in that tier now of the prices of the world among running backs.
Nice. I like it. Yeah, it's very interesting when you talk about kind of like the Tyler Shuck discourse. I do feel that for me, and I said this last week, I feel like beyond like the 206, everything else is meaningless for me in terms of drafts. And that's probably why I don't enjoy Dynasty. I get no benefit of like hitting on a third round pick and like, oh, look, like I had Woody Marks and then he's going to be useless like in 2 years. Like, all right, cool, great. That was fun, whatever. But I think if you see a quarterback that's getting drafted early, it's probably worth it in those later round picks. Just kind of take a dart throw. Like, is a 5th round quarterback going to necessarily jump into that kind of conversation? Probably not. You're going to need a lot of things that break their way. I know Brock Purdy probably was sitting on waivers at some point for people as Mr. Irrelevant. He wasn't getting picked up in drafts, right? So there's a lot of things when you are that day 3 QB, but if you have an early day 2 guy, I think that he fell pretty far in rookie drafts last year, and people that were willing to kind of take that gamble, it paid off. And that doesn't mean it's going to work out for everyone, but Joe, I think it's a great point that, hey, like if he gets that capital, you got to be at least willing to kind of get in the dance and see what happens for sure.
It's why we harp on the fact that the capital is the number one driving factor, because that tells you how much the team is invested in you into at least seeing what you can do on the field. If you get the opportunity in the field, then you have an opportunity to return fantasy points. So that's the whole idea, right there. Like Joe, to your point, I think a few of the leagues I was in, Shuck went in the third round of the rookie drafts, even though he's a second round, NFL quarterback. Right. So like looking back at that, like, yes, that was a misplaced. You should have just taken a shot just for the fact that he was a quarterback drafted in the second round. I can't get with you on Garrett Nussmeier, though. Oof, that guy makes me cringe.
You know what scares me, though, is that his dad and Mike McCarthy have a lot of connections. He was the QB coach. So
always the Steeler fan here, of course. Yes. I want to be clear. I'm not saying Nussmeier is good. I really couldn't tell you that. I'm just telling you, people that know stuff keep pushing it, and it reminds me so much of what was happening with Tyler Shuck last year. I didn't know the guy's name. It didn't make sense to me. That's not how it's supposed to be spelled. Like, why would we say that way? Oh, he's good. I promise you, he's going to be. The Giants are looking at him. Okay, Todd McShay, whatever. Well, he ends up being an early second-round pick for a reason, and I think that was an easy one in hindsight because Spencer Rattler wasn't very good, and the Saints weren't very good. Nussmeier, if he goes to the Steelers, that would be kind of interesting, but Rodgers probably has to die from some ayahuasca hit in order for Nussmeier to actually play in that scenario. And I don't know if that happens. So, like, there's a lot of that extra steps. I'm just saying people that know are talking about Nussmeier in the same sort of concept as Tyler Shuck, and that at least has my antennas up.
Yeah, sure. And Steelers like quarterbacks with no arms, so it makes sense.
Hey, if you can wear gloves in warm weather, you may be a Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback. All right? It's all good. And another quarterback that just came up in the comments, Taylon Green, do you see him as somebody, as a prospect who could surge as a result of the combine? He's one of those players that has a lot of that athletic prowess. We've already talked about how it's a weak quarterback class. Is anybody feeling like a little bit of Anthony Richardson, which is, by the way, Tyler Bradley's favorite quarterback of all time? So what do we think we could do with somebody like a Taylon Green?
Go ahead, Chris.
You can save this question for next week when Tyler's here, so he can answer it with a much better answer than I would give you, because he loves this guy. No, I do like him because this is such a weak class, and what I'm always harping on is when it comes to quarterbacks in fantasy, you want running game, right? And I like Taylon Green's ability. I'm not going to call him an Anthony Richardson because I think that's more of an insult than anything, but he's slightly more accurate, I would say. I feel like Anthony Richardson, even when he was in Florida, man, even Florida fans hated him. So I couldn't believe
Jalen
that he
was. I mean, a more recent version would be Jalen Milroe. Right. I'm asking.
Yeah, maybe Jalen Milroe, slightly more accurate than Anthony Richardson, but you want that running game. So I'm willing to take, especially in a draft class like this, take a shot with my late seconds, third round picks, whatever, take a shot on a quarterback that has that running upside. I don't know where he's going to land. I feel like he's probably going to get drafted. I'm thinking maybe like a fifth or sixth round pick for him. Probably not going to start right away. A guy who you're just going to want to draft with one of those late round picks and hold on your superflex rosters and pray that he's going to get some chance to shine at one point. But I mean, look at Malik Willis right now. Like, we're talking about he might cost $100 million for a team trying to sign him this offseason. It takes time for some of these guys that aren't big names. And Malik was, one of the bigger names in his draft class, but it's kind of the same draft class as this. So you might be holding on to Taylon for a while, but he might be worth it if you can get him in like the late third or fourth.
He screams Joe Milton to me. Like, big, athletic, can throw the ball a mile, just not as accurate. But he's going to wow you in underwear, first of all. So he's going to do great at the combine. That's number one. He's going to go he's going to go day 3. So he's going to be a developmental quarterback. But I mean, Joe Milton started one game, and dynasty people lost their mind trying to buy this guy low while they possibly could. We're still waiting for him to get a starting shot. This hasn't even happened yet, but he started one game, showed a little bit of flash. We know what the athleticism won, and people went crazy. Taylon Green, very much in the same mold as that.
I like it. Yeah, and then Lion in the chat had mentioned it seemed like injuries in that team just overall killed his draft outlook a little bit. It will be interesting to see how that happens. But that's why they do these different things. That's why they have the combine. That's why they have the pro days. it gives those players that maybe didn't necessarily have the shine during the year to really show themselves and see what they are able to do in different elements of competition. So I think that's pretty cool. So let's say that one of the teams that I have 2 first round picks. Unfortunately, I'm looking at like the 1-7, 1-10. How would y'all recommend me using those picks? Do you think I'm kind of like a stay and hold and just kind of take what I can get from it? Do I try to package it and move up, even though it feels like everybody knows that it's a top heavy kind of draft? Should I punt to another year? Should I go for proven assets in like kind of the NFL already? Like, how would you navigate kind of a situation like that where maybe people have been kind of on a rebuild, they have multiple picks, and now everybody's saying, well, hey, it's a terrible draft class. What do they do with that?
There's so many ways you can attack it. So, well, first of all, if you're somewhere between the 7 and the 10, then you have a playoff team. So I would be shopping that for a veteran, number one. If I really want to trade up into the draft, just know that it's probably going to cost you a little bit extra because the draft is top heavy. That's typically how it works when that happens. So you're probably going to have to look at your second round pick, maybe even if you have 2/3 or something like that, like a back end third or some other kind of like small little veteran sweetener piece. So it's going to cost you probably a little bit extra when you have a top heavy draft in order to crack into that. But if you have a playoff team and you're looking at these rebuild teams, you're like, look, there's a guy who's in a sweet spot somewhere between, 26, 28 years old, is not an elite player. Maybe he's a wide receiver 2 or a running back 2. It would help your team this year. It's not a bad move to make, especially if he's in his prime for another year or two. That's kind of how I look at it.
Sure. Okay. Any dissenting thoughts amongst the ranks?
I don't think I'm dissenting. I think you have to look at your roster. It's tough, right? Your team that has number 7, number 10. We could literally try to make Joe Frick's Dynasty team better since he doesn't like playing Dynasty very much. Great, we could all 3 of us do that, and would be a really productive use of the time for all of us here, other than good conversation. I really care about being liquid, and I think this is the part of Dynasty that's fun to me. You were talking about, Joe, that you don't enjoy hitting on 3rd round picks, so therefore you don't like Dynasty. I don't think that's quite the fair slight on anyone who likes Dynasty. That's not quite what we do it for. But I like the ability to make moves. I played in 17 leagues this year. I would say 12 of them were redraft related. A bunch of them are with all of your favorite fantasy experts out there. It's not fun to do that because we have to kind of be like stuck in our hot takes. Great, I had 8 shares of Chris Olave, but I can't really like trade him to somebody else because I was the Chris Olave guy, right? Like that. So in Dynasty, in my mind, I like to be liquid in a lot of instances. That requires you just knowing and keeping tabs on what your league is choosing to do. It's not a fair answer, but if somebody's actually listening to the show and trying to apply it to their fantasy league, it isn't necessarily go try to trade it, but it isn't necessarily go get 2027 picks. Although I know everybody wants to do that. So that would probably be the least likely outcome for me. I want to be liquid. So what's the way to do that? I wonder if this year, at least from a cheap perspective, or the way I try to do my resources, is targeting this free agent running back group. I'm going to just read off some names to you. Maybe we can nod heads, or maybe you guys can cut into me and say, like, Joe, that guy for sure. You can get him with 1 or 2 of these first-round picks. Kenneth Walker, now our Super Bowl MVP. We'll have to see if that ends up being an easy acquisition. Breece Hall, Travis Etienne, Rico Dowdle, Javonte Williams, Tyler Algier, Rashad White, J.K. Dobbins. We can go down further. Kenny Gainwell, your guy, of course. Joe, you probably don't need to give a first-round pick for Kenny Gainwell, but that's
I'll give
8.
up. That's fine.
Isaiah Pacheco, Najee Harris. We could. This is a 12 or 14 deep of useful free agent guys, and obviously you don't need to give up number 7 for Emmanuel Wilson because I'm a Packer fan. That'd be silly to do that. But I wonder if there's going to be a chance right now, today, when there isn't the combine stuff, there isn't the hype that's happening, and being able to convert these veteran guys come August, when inevitably people will get excited about the Jets offense actually looking good. Of course they won't. It's always the Jets, they'll stink, whatever else. But you could do that with some of these guys, and the uncertainty of where they'll sign might be a way to cheaply convert this into assets that you can then be liquid in later in the season. That would be my answer to this question.
I like it.
Yeah, I love that. That was very detailed. If I had to boil it down, I just took over an orphan, even though I swore I wouldn't do it this year. My friend came to me. He's like, I need you. I need your help. There's this orphan. And it had a lot of players that I didn't have a lot of exposure to. And I was like, you know what? I'm in because I don't have a lot of these guys. So let's just run it. But I think whenever I'm looking at a team, which you always do, as soon as you take over an orphan, of course, you're giving it extra scrutiny. You have to decide, is this team going to have a chance to contend this year, or is it not? Because I want to win, right? So I'm going to trade all of my draft picks for veterans every time if I think I have even a shot at winning. If I'm at that point where I'm not just a borderline playoff guy, I'm a playoff contender, I'm just going to continue to trade all of my draft picks because I don't want rookies. I want guys that are going to help me win. If you're not in that position, you want to be one of the teams that's very bottomed. So you want to start selling all of your, vets, selling people that you don't have long-term faith in so that you can make your way down to the 103, 102, 101, that sort of range and figure it out, whenever that draft season comes around. So it's very much, dynasty doesn't have to be a long-term play. Some people want to do these long rebuilds. It doesn't have to be that. Just take it year by year and see what's going to happen because it changes so fast.
Hey man, every league needs a good buy-in guy. He always shows up for the draft, pays the buy-in, and then you don't have to deal with them and don't have to really worry about it.
I thought you were going to say every league needs a good bottom. I'm like, okay, Joe, we're entering in a different part of the Friday late night show. But okay, got it.
No. We do that on the
Is
X.
Billy Hartford available? Where's he at?
and interesting timing. Tyler just popped back in. He said he heard Razorback talk. I don't think that's really what brought him back, but we'll let him believe that. And he's saying he loved the show tonight. So he is a big advocate for hitting on the late round picks. So kudos to him. Also,
are there people that don't want you to hit on late round picks, Joe? Is that a strategy that you shouldn't? Like, so he's a big advocate for hitting on those.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that it's one of those things where it's like people chase the Puka Nakua, people chase all of this stuff, and it's like the likelihood of it happening, the amount of time that goes into trying to figure out who that is, it's just not worth it to me. I'm just like, like I would rather pay like a first and some change, like after all the hype happens and overpay at the time than have to spend all these hours and hours and hours to convince myself. The reason I hate it, truthfully, is because it ruins my ability to play redraft. Because you get so bought into, if this thing happens and it breaks this way, then this guy's going to be relevant. And you know what? I am going to take him with this 9th round pick when Javonte Williams is very unsexily sitting there on a 1 million or a 1 year, $3 million contract. And it's like, no, Jadon Blue, they drafted him in the 4th round. He was at Texas. He's probably good. Ooh. And it's like, no, I should have just taken the guy that they brought in like willingly. Why did I convince myself of this? And it happens all the time. So the further that I can stay away from that, the more money I can win from my friends. So
Joe, I'm gonna cut in here, Joe, because the comment up here, which is far more important than you and Jaden Blue and your frustrations, it's fine. I feel annoyed because I would have loved to get the compliments from Sean Turner. Jacoby Lane would have probably been my guy. And it's ironic because Chris was talking about Cooper destroying his Penn State team this year. I watched Jacoby Lane make like 7 of the greatest catches against my Wisconsin Badgers 2 years ago. And I was like, I'm all in on this guy. This is awesome. And then kind of didn't do a whole lot. I thought when we're talking about a first round USC receiver, I'm like, oh, we're talking about Lane. It's Lemon, right? That's what we're all focused on. I think Lane is actually going to be one of the surprises. I didn't want to show my hand or my not being aware of the prospects, but I didn't know if Lane was considered part of that top 5 group necessarily. But when I was watching him, and I've watched him a lot really since that point where he killed my Badgers 2 years ago, I see a lot of Rashee Rice in the same way that people kind of discounted Rice a little bit to the speed. The route running, I think, from like just doing the slant stuff inside that Rice can do. Of course, having Mahomes makes a big difference. Andy Reid, yada yada. I think Lane can have that, but also that he's such a secure catcher. That really matters to me when we're in a class that doesn't have a lot of intangible guys that I think kind of wow off the page. I don't think Lane's going to be a first-round pick by any means, but I think the worst-case scenario is probably David Bell, that at Purdue, that third-round receiver. Okay. No. I'm saying like the worst case of this. I loved Bell, who was a 3rd-round receiver for the Browns like 3 or 4 years ago. That's what Lane could be too, especially if he ends up running the 40 that we all think he will. But I'm going to be on the optimistic side and say my Badgers really played good defense, and Lane was just better 2 years ago. Don't talk about what happened this year.
Yeah, I did draft David Bell, by the way.
I was interested in David Bell too. But Jacoby Lane right now, his consensus mock draft, and this is all going to change over the next couple of months, but as it sits right now, he's about a mid-day 2 pick. And I actually think he's one of the most overrated wide receivers as far as narrative goes right now, because there's a lot of people who are trying to push him into the higher end day 2 and making an argument that maybe he should even be a day 1 pick. And a lot of it is built off of what I think is false perception based on the film and based on some of the statistics too. So like, as far as like his sure hands go, he had 4 drops. He had a below average drop rate this past year. For being a guy who's listed as 6'4", is probably going to wind up being more like 6'2.5", 6'3". He doesn't have a great contested catch rate. It's actually a below average in that sense too. Now, to your point, the Rashee Rice comp, I don't absolutely hate that, because you're right. He does run those types of slants and those types of routes very, very well. That is part of his game. But if he comes out and runs like a 4.6, which I'm a little bit afraid that he might, then we're talking about a whole different kind of ball game here with Jacoby Lane, where maybe he starts going into Kelvin Harmon territory, if anybody remembers that name from way back in the day. And so I'm not as big on Jacoby Lane. There's a lot that he's going to have to prove to me athletic wise, but I wasn't a big fan of what I saw on film this year, nor some of the analytics behind him this past season.
So one thing that you mentioned, Joe, that I wanted to get y'all's perspective on, there is a lot of things that change, and it's a little bit early to be talking about a pre-combine, but you mentioned the Chiefs and being able to be with Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid, and the like. How much stock do y'all put into landing spot? Were you somebody that drafted CEH over Jonathan Taylor?
Well, you're talking to the Badger fan, so no. I was all in on Jonathan Taylor. I also like DeAndre Swift more. I understood the merits of what the next Brian Westbrook could be for the Andy Reid offense. And actually in redraft, I did take CEH in a few spots late first round, which I definitely regretted. I'm actually really curious on what Dan and Chris's thoughts are on this. I'll kind of like tee it up for them. In a class that we conceptually think is a little bit weaker, I think it is deep at receiver, but it's because there's a lot of question marks. There's nobody like outstanding. I think deep receiver classes can kind of vary, but the idea or concept of deep receiver isn't these guys are good, and there's like 17 of them. It's that, well, they're better than a lot of the other things that you could draft at that spot, and the way that the NFL teams have resources dedicated to it, we'll see these guys go often in the second or third round. So when I say deep receiver class, when there isn't a whole lot of things that are like really, really positive, it wholly depends on where they're going, what the landing spot is, and if they're competing for, the third, like theoretically, Jack Besh and Deontay Thornton would have been in really good spots. Thornton was a starter, right? Like he's just doing the Jalen Guyton run 30 yards on the field stuff for the first half of the season for the Raiders, but he was getting starting snaps. Well, that doesn't matter because that team stunk. So I think that is going to be a really big deal for where a lot of these guys, let's just say outside of receiver 6 and onward, land and what they'll do initially in their couple first seasons.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things that I had highlighted actually to discuss a little bit today was, obviously I love the wide receiver class. I think it's very deep, and I think that's the strength of this rookie class. But I think that could honestly be a problem because it means that we're all going to be hyping up receivers. So there's going to be a ton of receivers that go in the first 2 rounds of dynasty drafts. And it means there's going to be a shitload of busts. These players can't all be good. And on average, there's 5 or 6 receivers taken in the first round of the NFL draft. So not all of them hit, right? So we think that for sure, right, Tate and Lemon and Tyson are probably going to hit, but we don't even know that for certain. And I would say that I have more concerns about Tate, even though I'm like one of the world's biggest Tate's fans. But if he lands in the wrong spot, I don't know that he can necessarily hold the same value as Tyson or Lemon. So when we look at the class going into this draft season, right now it's all just about what are these players, where, what are they as they stand right now? And when they get that draft capital behind them with all of this hype, pre NFL draft for dynasty, there's a lot of potential for busts with this wide receiver class because none of these guys are going to go, not all these guys are going to go right into their teams and immediately slot in as producers. And we have short attention spans in dynasty. Nobody wants to hold on. I mean, I was the world's biggest Kyle Williams fan, and I still am, but that guy did not produce at all. You know what I mean? And that was a team that made it to the Super Bowl. So it's like you got to cut bait at some point, right? With a lot of these players. So you're gonna have some misses, unfortunately. And it feels like this wide receiver class is just full of landmines at this point.
Well, I think you have to be careful about what you classify as a great landing spot. Yes, draft capital is important. Yes, a guy who's lined up for a position to potentially start in the upcoming season is something you want to pay attention to. But Joe, you hit it perfectly. It was a crappy offense that Dante Thornton and Jack Besh were on. So the landing spot should really be in the realm of, is it decent capital combined with, is it a functional offense? That's what the landing spot really needs to be classified as for people moving forward when they talk about that part. And not enough people talk about that. And I actually just did a deep dive on this, and it was relative to coaching changes and fantasy impact and what play calling and the quality of offense has an effect on fantasy football positions in particular. And since we're talking about wide receivers, the biggest find that I came across is that if you were not above average or an elite offense, you could not sustain more than one wide receiver that was fantasy relevant on your team at a time. That matters a lot when we're talking about this. It doesn't matter that you were starting out there on the field. If you were on a low quality offense, you were not getting the football unless you were the wide receiver one, and that wide receiver one had to be a dynamic talent in order for him to be anything more than a wide receiver 3 flex play, let's just say. So it does matter. Landing spot matters, but it's not just draft capital. It's about the offense of quality that you land on too.
Real quick, Joe, I want to tie this in with what Dan's saying and actually what Chris said too.
Got
So I've seen a few mocks where Colonel Tate goes to the Titans, for example. That would not be good. I like Cam Ward a decent amount. I think Colonel Tate could be a theoretical wide receiver 1. I don't want Tate to be a wide receiver 1 for the Titans. But you're going to hear people, let's just say, certainly by August, but by July and June, as we have nothing else to talk about. We've done these things in circles now. Well, if Colonel Tate is the number 1 receiver, the Titans offense is so bad, I don't want him at all. Wrong, because Dan pointed out, you even in a really bad offense, this was my shtick in Drake London's, I guess, second year. That would have been Desmond Ritter's rookie year. Amari Cooper was the good receiver for the really bad Browns team, which Jacoby Brissett, right? In this version of the NFL right now, the way that it's being played, even bad teams, for the most part, there are exceptions, even bad teams can have a number 1 fantasy asset that matters. So don't gaslight me to thinking that Colonel Tate won't be anything because he's the number 1 receiver for the Titans. You can have the number 1 receiver be a factor even in bad offenses. It's a lot to ask of a rookie to do, but Ted McMillan's probably the best example of this, where we didn't assume. I know that there were some weird people last month of last season, some of the Panthers offense being good. They were dumb for doing that, but Ted McMillan became that kind of guy. So that's the positive example of it. And I will always be a proponent of, I want the team's number 1 receiver, even if the offense is bad. I think too often we get kind of caught up in that mix, especially in that June and July and August period where we have so many things that we've already talked ad nauseum about.
You want the number 1 wide receiver, you want the number 1 running back. And just to piggyback off the Tennessee Titan thing, Brian Daboll's the offensive coordinator. He hyper targets his number 1 go-to wide receivers, was Stephon Diggs with Malik Neighbors. So you can feel pretty good about that.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, we are coming up on the hour here. I do want to give a shout out to Jamie, who popped in here for the end of the show. A little bummed that they missed pretty much all of it. The good news is that you can run this back whenever you want. You can also like, subscribe, do all those things so that next week you're able to jump right in, because we are here every week during the off season. Now, before we get on our way and get ready for a magical weekend of hearts and discount candy on Sunday, I want to know, do any of y'all have kind of a my guy at this like pre-combine juncture? This may not necessarily be somebody that you lock in at the end, but there's somebody that you feel can either be like a riser or somebody that is a sleeper that you're like, hey, like, I'm really excited. I think that they're going to have a good combine.
So I'll go first. And this feels gross because this is throwing fodder to Tyler Bradley. But Mike Washington Jr. is somebody that I'm pretty excited to see go in there and light it up. He was already one of the most explosive running backs coming into this process. He was in top, he's the top 15 and 15 plus carries, 15-yard plus carries. His yards after contact is fantastic. So the only thing you're trying to figure out is how good of a pass catcher can he be? Because when you have that profile, you want to be a good pass catcher, but it didn't necessarily pop up in the productivity during his time in Arkansas. But if he can go out there and light it up, he might be that running back that we catch in our rookie drafts in the late end second round, maybe even third round, depending upon where he goes in the NFL draft. That's somebody who could really be a fantasy factor and be explosive.
I'll stick to my bread and butter. I do think Emmett Johnson's going to be that guy for me throughout this entire process. I think a little bit Bucky Irving whenever I watch him play. There are offenses, and this is back to our conversation earlier. There are some offenses that I'd be really excited for him to go to. There are a bunch of others that don't use him as a pass catching option that I'd be a little bit disappointed in. So it matters. I was the Travion Henderson guy last year. Obviously, the second pick of the second round. By the end of April, that everyone was the Travion Henderson guy. But I feel like by the end of January, early February, to be on that forefront was kind of a big deal. I didn't like where Henderson landed. I was a little bit nervous his rookie season that he was going to have to split time, and Josh McDaniels does dumb stuff with his running backs. And there was a lot of reasons to say Henderson's a great player, but it won't really work out. And we had 2 or 3 magical games in his rookie season where it made a difference. I think there's a lot of places where I could find Emma Johnson's skill set and utility as a pass catching weapon, again, kind of the Bucky Irving mold, more or less, that I'd be really excited for. But it is dependent on the landing spots actually being applicable to what I think his fantasy value could be.
All right, Chris, bring it home.
Yeah, I love that. My partner in crime, Dustin, the Devi sensei, loves both of those guys, Emmett Johnson and Mike Henderson, and he just put a ton of Henderson tape on his Twitter. So he dove really deep into that for our rookie guide. My guy, though, that I've been locked in on for a long time, especially now that I've done a couple of mock drafts recently, Michael Trigg. I think he was floating around, possibly being tight end 1 for me. And I know that he's got some flaws to his game, but for fantasy, man, I don't really care about his flaws, because if he gets on the field, this guy can just catch the ball. He doesn't run the greatest routes, but he goes up there and he gets it. He's just a highlight reel machine. So when I look at, he's a beast too. If you look at him, he's a monster sized man. So if he gets a chance to be on the field, this is kind of like Darnell Washington part 2. If Darnell Washington was slightly better at receiving, that would be Michael Trigg. So I'm all in on him because I've been seeing him go in the third round of mock drafts, very early, of course, in the off season, but he's my guy at this point.
Good deal. All right. Well, those are the 3 conveniently that I was also going to say. So I don't really have anything to add to that discussion, but I'm glad that you guys are reading my notes before the show. No, I'm just kidding. All right. So before we get out of here, I do want to give y'all a chance. Awesome show tonight. As always, you guys are always bringing the heat. Let the people know where they can find you, where you're doing content, where they can follow you on the X, Instagram, OnlyFans, whatever it is that y'all are up to in this fine off season. So Chris, we'll start with you and then go around the horn.
Thank you. Yeah, you can find me at Chris the Cardman on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it. And then, of course, the Devi Dojo. We are on the Fantasy Football Advice Network YouTube, and then just type Devi Dojo in wherever you find your podcast if you prefer audio versions.
Yeah, you mentioned the OnlyFans. I thought that's why Tyler wasn't here, as he's getting a head start in his Valentine plans for tomorrow. You can follow me on JB Fantasy Sports on Twitter, on X. I do the RotoWire Fantasy Football Show every Friday on SiriusXM Channel 87 when football season's happening. We unfortunately have just passed that now, so I'll catch you guys back in the airwaves at that point, probably June. It feels like it's earlier and earlier. And then we'll have the Angel Fire Radio Show 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern on Sundays for a few more weeks yet as well, too. We do a lot of different sport talk there. It's not just football, unfortunately, because that's probably my bread and butter. We'll have some March Madness talk, some NBA as well, too. So just a variety program. I try to make it like your local sports radio show, just on the SiriusXM Fantasy platform. So big deal to be. Really fun to be a part of this from a dynasty perspective, because now I got my wheels turning a little bit. I will probably pester a few of my league mates and annoy them about not doing trades that I want them to do. But this has been a good conversation.
Yeah, and I'm Dan Mander, Operation Domination. Make sure you download your favorite podcast app and check out our video content on the Fantasy Football Advice Network channel at FF Advice Net. And I'm going to be a part of this show pretty consistently moving forward too. Right, Jeff?
Good deal. Good deal. All right. And you know who it is. It's your boy, Joe Frick. Endorse me on LinkedIn for all things fantasy football and Twitter debauchery related. Thank y'all so much for tuning in this week from the forum. You can find us every week at 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 o'clock Central for all your fantasy football needs. Y'all have a wonderful Friday night, and we will see you next time.
We are here. We are here. FantasySportsAdvice.com, offering the best fantasy sports social media platform. Why join endless Discord communities or the trolls of Reddit? Fantasy Sports Advice is a community designed to help you win with 24/7 support. Go to FantasySportsAdvice.com and become a pro member for unlimited access. Again, go to FantasySportsAdvice.com.